Okay, so imagine this.
Okay.
You're a young man
Uh-huh.
in the 19th century.
Okay.
You inherit a fortune.
Right.
Millions in today's money
Yeah.
while still in diapers.
Wow.
What do?
Mm.
Invest it wisely.
Mm-hmm.
Build a legacy.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
if you're John Mad Jack Mytton,
Mad Jack Mytton.
you set your nightshirt on fire to cure hiccups.
Wow. That's a new one.
That's just one
Okay.
of the many outlandish tales
Okay.
we'll uncover today
Okay.
as we delve into the life
Right.
of Mad Jack Mytton.
I like it.
He's a figure
Yeah.
who embodies both
Uh-huh.
the allure and the danger
Yeah.
of unchecked privilege.
Privilege. Right.
A cautionary tale
Yes.
that still resonates
Right.
centuries later.
Absolutely.
And we're lucky enough
Yeah.
to have a stack of firsthand accounts,
Oh, wow.
biographies and writings
Right.
from his friends and contemporaries,
Good temper.
including a sporting writer known as Nimrod.
Oh, Nimrod.
So buckle up, because this deep dive is going to be a wild ride.
I am ready.
So
Yeah.
what's fascinating about Mytton
What is fascinating about Mytton?
is that he wasn't just a wealthy eccentric.
No,
He was a product of his time.
he was.
Early 19th century England
Yeah,
had a certain tolerance,
they did.
even fascination with
Yeah.
the outrageous behavior of
Yeah.
the upper class.
The upper class, yeah.
So
Was Mytton truly mad,
was he really mad,
as his nickname suggests?
as Mad Jack suggests?
Or was he simply playing a role
Interesting.
that society expected of him?
Yeah,
That's the question we'll explore today.
I like it.
Let's start with his early life.
All right, early life.
Mytton was born into immense wealth,
Oh, yeah.
inheriting estates and a fortune
Yeah.
after his father's death.
Hmm.
It's almost unimaginable,
It is.
the level of privilege he experienced
Right.
from the moment he was born.
Day one. And it sounds like
Yeah.
that privilege came with very few boundaries.
Very few, uh-huh.
Our sources describe him as
Okay.
being incredibly indulged by his mother,
My mom, yeah.
expelled from multiple schools for,
Oh.
let's just say,
Let's just say it.
not fitting in
Mm,
with the traditional boarding school mold.
right, yeah.
There's a story about him
There he is.
trying to convince his headmaster
Okay.
that he needed a larger allowance
He needed more money.
to support his wife
His wife?
at the age of 13.
13. Oh, my.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To be a fly on the wall
Right.
for that conversation.
I would have loved to have been there.
It seems like even as a child,
Yeah.
he had a knack for
Yeah.
bending reality
Reality, huh?
to fit his whims.
Interesting.
And this disregard for rules and expectations
Uh-huh.
continued into adulthood.
It did.
He had a brief stint
Okay.
in the military,
In the military, right?
but spent most of his time there. Yeah. Engaging in,
Yeah.
shall we say, less than soldierly
Not
activity.
for soldierly, right?
Like losing the modern equivalent of $600,000
Wow.
on a single billiards match.
On billiards.
Exactly.
Amazing.
Money seemed to have
Uh,
absolutely no meaning to him.
don't mean it.
There are accounts of him using banknotes
Bang nose.
as kindling for fires,
As kindling.
or even eating them.
Eating them. Oh, my gosh.
It's like he was actively trying to prove
Yeah.
that money couldn't buy happiness.
Right.
Or maybe he was just bored.
Maybe. Yeah.
Boredom might have played a part.
It might have.
He seemed to crave constant stimulation,
Constant stimulation. Yeah.
always pushing the boundaries
Mm-hmm.
of acceptable behavior.
Of what you're supposed to do.
And those boundaries
Mm-hmm.
were pretty flexible, it seems.
There were.
For someone of his social standing,
Oh, of course.
that's the key point.
That is.
Society allowed him
Yeah.
a certain degree of latitude
Latitude. Yeah.
because of his wealth and status.
Of course, wealth and status.
So he was playing the role of the eccentric gentleman,
Right.
and everyone was entertained
Right.
by his antics.
Yeah.
As long as no one got too hurt.
No one got hurt. Yeah.
To a certain extent, yes.
To a certain extent.
But there were definitely times
No, we're.
when his behavior crossed the line
It did.
from amusing to dangerous.
Easing to dangerous.
Even cruel.
Cruel.
Like the story about him
Hey.
deliberately driving his carriage into a ditch
What?
just to see what it would feel like to overturn or riding a bear into a party,
Bear.
resulting in,
Yeah.
predictably,
Of course.
some rather painful injuries.
I can imagine.
And this wasn't just a youthful phase, right?
Uh-huh.
This pattern of reckless behavior continued throughout his life.
It's about his life, yeah.
Absolutely.
It did?
It seemed to be a core part of his personality. This need to push limits, to defy expectations.
Interesting.
But it's important to remember that alongside this recklessness, there were also moments of genuine generosity and kindness.
Really?
Okay.
Okay.
Let's unpack that.
Let's unpack it.
I'm curious to hear about the other side of Mad Jack.
The other side, yeah.
What evidence do we have?
What evidence?
Of his generosity.
Of generosity. Well, there are numerous accounts of him helping those less fortunate.
Less fortunate, okay.
He was known to forgive debts.
Forgiving debts.
For tenants struggling to make ends meet.
Wow.
And he would often give away food and money to the poor.
To the poor.
Yeah.
But was this genuine altruism?
Was it?
Or was it just another way for him to flaunt his wealth and unconventionality?
Yeah. That's where things get interesting.
That's the question.
Yeah.
Some sources suggest that his giving was impulsive.
Impulsive, yeah.
Almost performative.
Right.
But others describe moments of genuine empathy and concern.
Concern for others, yeah.
For others, for example.
For example, there's a story about him
encountering
a beggar.
A beggar,
On a freezing winter day.
Right.
Mytton not only gave the man money.
Gave him money.
But also took off his own coat.
Oh, wow.
And gave it to him, despite being poorly dressed himself.
Wow.
For the weather.
For the weather.
Yeah.
That does suggest a level of compassion.
It does.
That goes beyond just wanting to show off.
I think so. Yeah. Exactly. And it highlights the complexities of his character.
Yeah.
We can't simply categorize him as either a heartless rogue or a misunderstood saint.
Right.
He was a mixture of both.
Yeah.
A product of his upbringing, his wealth, and perhaps some deeper psychological forces that we can only speculate about.
Yeah. So he was a man of contradictions.
He was.
Capable of great kindness and reckless abandon.
Yes.
Often in the same breath.
Often at the same time. Precisely.
Yeah. Right.
And this duality is reflected in his relationships as well.
His relationships.
Particularly his marriages.
Let's dive into that.
Okay.
He was married twice, right?
He was married twice, yes.
Okay.
His first wife, Harriet, sadly died young. After rumors of mistreatment.
Oh, wow. That's heartbreaking.
It is.
Do our sources give us any insight into the nature of their relationship?
Into their relationship. Unfortunately, details are scarce.
Who cares?
But given Mytton's unpredictable nature, it's not hard to imagine that married life with him was turbulent. That's to say the least.
And his second marriage.
He married a young woman named Caroline. And their early years seemed relatively happy.
Okay.
They had 5 children together.
5 children.
However, Mytton's increasingly erratic behavior likely fueled by his escalating alcohol consumption. Eventually led Caroline to leave him.
Oh, wow.
In 1830.
So even though he was capable of love and affection, his inability to control his impulses ultimately sabotaged his chance.
It did.
At a stable family life.
Yeah. It's a tragic pattern.
It is.
That we see repeat itself throughout his life. He had moments of genuine connection and kindness, but they were often overshadowed by his self-destructive tendencies.
It makes you wonder if he ever longed for a different kind of life. One with less chaos. And more stability.
Perhaps. But there's also a sense that he thrived on that chaos. That it was part of what made him feel alive.
He's alive. Okay.
Yay.
So we've got this complex figure.
We do.
A man of privilege. Contradictions. And a penchant for the dramatic. But all this extravagance. Had to have consequences, right?
It did.
Even a fortune as vast as Mytton's couldn't last forever.
No. You're absolutely right. And that's where we see his life start to unravel. Years of lavish spending. Reckless gambling and impulsive generosity. Eventually caught up with him.
So the party couldn't last forever.
It couldn't.
What happened when reality finally caught up with Mad Jack?
Well, he tried to outrun it. Literally. He fled England. To escape his creditors.
To escape creditors, okay.
Ending up in France
for a while. You'd think facing financial ruin would have been a wake-up call.
Right.
A chance to turn things around.
Yeah. You'd think.
You would think.
Wouldn't you?
You would think.
But Mytton, even in dire straits,
yeah,
couldn't seem to shake off his old habits.
I know.
His friend Nimrod visited him in France.
In France.
And was shocked by his decline.
Ooh.
He described Mytton as a melancholy spectacle of fallen man.
Wow. It's like a train wreck.
Yeah.
In slow motion.
In slow motion.
You can see the disaster coming.
Right.
But you can't look away.
You can't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And yet, even in this state.
Even in this state, yeah.
Mytton clung to the belief.
He did.
That his luck would change.
Oh, wow.
That he'd somehow regain his fortune.
Interesting.
It's almost like he was living in a fantasy world.
In a fantasy world.
Detached from the consequences of his actions.
Consequences.
That detachment.
Yeah.
That inability to grasp.
Yeah.
The severity of his situation.
The severity
was a recurring theme throughout his life.
Throughout his life.
It's as if his immense wealth created a buffer.
It did.
Between him and the real world.
And the real world.
Preventing him from fully understanding the impact
of his choices.
Of his choices.
It raises an interesting question.
It does.
Did his wealth, the very thing that gave him so much freedom.
So much freedom.
Yeah. Also contribute to his downfall.
Interesting. It's certainly a paradox worth considering.
It is.
We often think of wealth as a shield.
As a shield.
A protection against life's hardships.
Right.
But in Mytton's case,
yeah,
it seems to have had the opposite effect.
The opposite effect.
It insulated him from consequences. Allowing him to indulge his every whim.
Every whim.
Without ever truly facing the repercussions.
Wow. And those repercussions?
The repercussions ultimately led him back to England, right?
He did go back to England.
He went back.
Yes. He eventually returned.
Okay.
Only to be imprisoned for debt.
Imprisoned for debt.
Imagine that.
Oh, wow.
The man who once treated money like confetti.
Yeah.
Now confined to a cell because of it.
It's amazing. It's a stark contrast.
It is.
A reminder that fortune can be.
Fortune can be, yeah.
As fickle as it is alluring.
Absolutely. And sadly, this is where our story takes its final turn.
The final turn.
John Mytton died in prison.
Died in prison.
In 1834.
1834.
At the young age of 37.
37. Wow, wow. What a tragic end.
It is.
To such a tumultuous life.
A tumultuous life.
You mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
That his first wife died young as well.
She did.
And there were hints of mistreatment.
There were.
Do our sources shed any light?
Do they?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the accounts we have are quite vague about his first marriage.
About his first marriage.
They focus more on his public antics.
Right.
And financial downfall.
Practical downfall.
It's possible that the full extent of his behavior.
She's behaving
in his marriage.
Within his marriage.
Both the good and the bad.
The good and the bad.
Remained private.
Right.
Shielded from public scrutiny.
Right.
By the social norms of the time.
Social norms. That's a good point.
Yeah.
We have to remember that these sources were written by people who knew him.
They were.
Who were perhaps trying to preserve his reputation.
They were.
To some extent.
To some extent, exactly.
Yeah.
So while we can speculate.
Yeah.
Based on the available information. We have to acknowledge that there are gaps in our understanding aspects of his life that remain shrouded in mystery.
Shrouded in mystery. That mystery, I think, is part of what makes him so fascinating.
It is.
He's like a puzzle.
He is.
That we can never fully solve. But the act of trying to piece together his story.
Right.
To understand his motivations. And contradictions. Is both intriguing.
It is.
And thought-provoking.
Thought-provoking. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And his story doesn't end with his death.
It doesn't.
Remember, he had children. Including a son.
Right.
Who inherited not only his father's name. But also, it seems, some of his tendencies.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that his son.
Yes.
John Mytton Jr. Pulled a similar stunt.
He did.
Riding a horse up a flight of stairs.
Yes, it seems.
Yeah.
Young John felt compelled to follow in his father's footsteps.
At least
in terms of his penchant for the dramatic.
The dramatic. This raises the question we touched on earlier.
It does.
Is it nature or nurture?
Nature or nurture?
Was John Jr. destined to repeat his father's mistakes?
Interesting.
Because of some inherited predisposition?
Right.
Or was it the legacy of the Mytton name?
Yeah.
The stories he grew up hearing.
The stories.
About his father's exploits.
His exploits.
That shaped his actions.
That shaped his actions. It's a fascinating question.
It is.
And one that continues to be debated
Yeah.
in psychology and sociology today. Did John Jr. inherit his father's madness? Or was it the weight of expectation?
Right.
The pressure to live up to a certain image that pushed him down a similar path?
Down a similar path. It makes you think about
It does.
the lasting impact of our family histories.
Our family histories.
The ways in which our parents' choices can echo from generations.
Through generations.
Look, before we get too lost in the philosophical weeds. Let's bring this back to our listeners.
Yeah.
What can we, people living centuries after Mad Jack, learn from his life? Is his story merely a cautionary tale?
Is it?
Or is there something more to be gleaned
from
his triumphs and tragedies?
Interesting question. I think it's both.
Both.
On the one hand, Mytton's life is a stark warning.
A stark warning.
About the perils of unchecked privilege.
Unchecked privilege.
And the destructive nature of addiction.
Addiction. He had all the advantages in the world.
He did.
And yet he squandered them.
He did.
Through reckless choices.
Reckless choices.
It's a reminder that wealth without responsibility. Can be a dangerous thing.
It can be, exactly.
Yeah.
But his story also highlights the complexities of human nature.
Right.
The fact that even the most flawed individuals
and
possess moments of generosity and kindness.
Generosity and kindness. He was a man of contradictions.
He was.
Reckless, yet generous. Charming, yet destructive.
Yeah.
A larger-than-life figure.
Larger-than-life.
Who ultimately succumbed to very human frailty.
Human frailties, precisely.
Yeah.
And I think his story invites us to consider the many facets. Of our own personality.
Personalities. The ways in which our light and shadow sides coexist.
Yeah.
And how the choices we make shape not only our own lives, but also the lives of those around us. Perhaps even for generations to come.
That's a powerful thought.
It is.
We're not just isolated individuals.
Right.
Making choices in a vacuum.
Our
actions ripple outwards.
They do.
Impacting the people we love.
And
the world around us.
And those ripples can continue long after we're gone. Just look at the legacy of Mad Jack Mytton. He's been dead for almost 2 centuries.
And yet, here we are. Still talking about
it.
Still trying to make sense. Of his extraordinary and ultimately tragic life.
It's funny how even though Mad Jack lived centuries ago, his story still feels so relevant today.
I agree.
We're still fascinated by figures who live life on the edge, who push the boundaries of what's considered acceptable.
Of what you should do. What's fascinating is how Mytton's life reflects certain anxieties that haven't really changed that much.
Haven't really changed.
And we still grapple with the same questions about wealth and responsibility, the allure of risky behavior, and where the line is drawn.
Where's the line?
Between eccentricity and self-destruction.
Totally.
Yeah.
Like we're drawn to these cautionary tales.
Right.
Even if deep down, we kind of envy their freedom to break the rules.
Their freedom. And the sources we've examined these accounts from people who knew him personally offer a more nuanced perspective.
A nuanced perspective.
On his life. They don't shy away from his flaws.
Right.
But they also highlight
the
complexities of his character, the moments of genuine kindness that existed alongside his more reckless tendencies.
Right. It's not just a black and white portrait of a bad guy. There's a lot of gray area. Which makes him even more interesting.
It does.
To try to understand.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it reminds us that
it does.
Even the most outlandish figures The ones who seem larger than life.
Larger than life.
Are still ultimately human.
Ultimately human.
They have hopes. Right.
Fears.
Yeah.
Regrets.
Uh-huh.
Just like the rest of us.
Just like us. I think that's what makes Mytton's story so compelling.
Compelling. Yeah,
it's not just a historical curiosity.
A curiosity.
It's a reflection.
It is.
Of the human condition.
The human condition.
In all its messy glory.
Messy glory. Indeed. And as we conclude this deep dive,
okay,
I'd like to leave you with this question.
Okay.
What would John Mytton make?
What would he think?
Of the world today.
Of today.
How would he navigate the complexities of modern life?
Modern life.
With its social media.
Social media.
Its constant pressure to perform.
Yeah.
Its seemingly endless opportunities.
Endless opportunities.
For both indulgence and self-destruction.
Oh, that's a good one.
It is.
Would he be an influencer?
Would he?
With millions of followers.
With millions of followers.
Documenting his outrageous stunts.
Outrageous stunts.
For the world to see.
Or would he be completely overwhelmed?
Overwhelmed?
By the pace and pressure.
The pace and pressure.
Of modern society.
Of modern society. Perhaps both.
Maybe.
It's interesting to imagine him trying to make sense.
Trying to make sense.
Of the world we live in today.
The world we live in.
And it's a reminder.
It is a reminder.
That even though times change.
Yeah.
Certain human tendencies.
Human tendencies.
The desire for excitement.
Excitement.
The struggle for connection.
Connection.
The allure of pushing boundaries.
Pushing boundaries.
Those things seem to remain constant.
They do. Well said.
Thank you.
I think that's the perfect note to end on.
I agree.
Thanks for joining me.
It was my pleasure.
On this wild ride through the life.
Wild ride.
Of Mad Jack Mytton.
Of Mad Jack Mytton.
Until next time.
Yes.
Keep those deep dives going.
Keep them going.